Welcome back, everybody. This is Eric and Chad here with Iraq Veteran 8888, and today we've got another Gun Gripe episode for you. All right, this one's a doozy, and I actually can't believe that it's been this much time that it's taken us to get to this particular gripe. So
we talk about it all the time.
We do talk about it, but we haven't done a gripe about it, and that's parts support. All right, this goes into some pretty extreme veins here that we're going to talk about, and sometimes it can be difficult to get spare parts for your firearms, and we're going to talk about that a little bit. If you're interested in firearms technology, definitely check out the folks at SDI. They have some wonderful gunsmithing programs, great higher education in the realm of firearms technology. Get that GI Bill working for you, and we appreciate them for supporting Gun Gripes, supporting our efforts. So let's dive into the beans and bullets of this particular gripe. You know, there are certain guns that tend to be a really good seller, not only due to their popularity, but due to just how easy it is to get spare parts and things like that. Like certain guns sort of overcome those boundaries and become, I guess, what we would consider standards within the industry. You look at the AR-15, you look at like something like a Glock, or you look at a good pump shotgun like a Remington 870 or a 590 or something of that nature. Certain guns just seem to transcend barriers in terms of logistics and supply, and because of their commonplace use, they tend to be a little bit easier to source spare parts for. And I believe that a lot of people tend to undervalue, something that's common that you can actually get parts for, versus a gun that's really specialized. And in some cases, the parts supply for certain firearms can be really difficult just to procure even just basic spare parts.
Well, so, not only difficult, but also very expensive.
Yeah, yeah. We are going to talk about that. So we've got a lot of stories to share and things like that. So like some manufacturers are a little bit easier going when it comes to, being able to get spare parts. And other manufacturers, it seems like it's very difficult to get parts. Not that they're not available, but that the availability is a little bit spotty. And we are going to be, talking about certain manufacturers in this video. And the point of this is not to call out manufacturers in a negative way or anything like that. We're just simply stating our experiences with some of these manufacturers in terms of getting parts and things like that.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think the basics of this video, all right, you take an AR-15, okay? You can find parts for an AR-15 anywhere, all right? There are a copious number of OEM manufacturers that are producing small parts like bolt carrier groups, bolts, hammers, springs, firing pins, extractors, all the small parts that are necessary to keep these rifles running. Because over time, the more you shoot these guns, obviously, their parts are going to break. You're going to break extractors. You're going to have a firing pin that either gets walled out or something because you're running real hot ammo or whatever the case might be. You're going to have springs that lose their springiness over time, and you have to replace them, okay? These parts,
very technical term.
Yeah, springiness. But you can get these parts for relative low cost a lot of times. I mean, you can get oops kits for ARs for $10 that have pretty much all the springs and pins and things like that in there that you need to repair your gun and get it back in the field. But when you take something like a SCAR, for example, and, Eric's had the trouble with the SCAR 17, the SCAR 20S recently, that getting those small parts, even firing pins, extractors, complete bolts and things like that, has been a very difficult task and very costly. I mean, The cost of these parts are sometimes 4 to 5 times what the similar AR component would be, even for like an AR-10. The AR-10 is a little bit more of a beast, and it does have some more specialized parts because there are certain manufacturers and that produce different variants of the AR-10, like the SR-25 and such. You have Knight spec, you have DPMS spec stuff, and those parts can be a little bit more expensive, but the SCAR really takes the cake. I mean, it really does.
It does. All right, so I think it's important to maybe back up just a little bit and talk sort of about parts with these guns and stuff. And I'm assuming that there's probably a lot of new people watching our channel that are not gun people. So if you are experienced with firearms, please bear with me because I'm going to go over some things that are really extremely basic, but people need to kind of understand that we do have a lot of new gun owners, and we want to make sure that they're armed not only with the firearms to protect themselves, but the knowledge to know what they're getting themselves into, right? Okay, so say I'm going to buy a car, right? I'm going to do a bunch of research. I'm going to look at consumer reports. I'm going to look at reviews. I'm going to read articles. I'm going to gather as much information as I can. But what is another thing about a car purchase that I take into account? Cost of ownership. Cost of ownership's a big thing, right? Yeah, that Mercedes-Benz might be a really fancy car, but you're going to, when you go and get a $750 oil change, you might not be singing the happy song, Now look, as long as you know that it's going to be a $750 oil change, then you're probably okay. But you don't just buy a Mercedes and not know the real cost of ownership, the maintenance, how much it costs to fix, basic things, even just like brakes and tires and simple things, right? There are things on a vehicle that wear out and have to be replaced more often than others, like I guess what we would consider consumable parts, brake pads, oil, filters, fluids, things like that are things we have to replenish and go through. And very much just like in the car world, in the gun world, there are consumables that we do go through and parts that you probably want to keep on hand for various firearms just in case something goes wrong. It's very simple to self-diagnose and even fix yourself, okay? A gunsmith is kind of like a gun mechanic, okay, compared to a car where you have a mechanic works on a car. So, yeah, some levels of gunsmithing. Let's say you are a car tech or whatever, and you need to like rebore some cylinder heads or something, or you need to use a brake rotor to turn down a brake lathe to turn down a brake rotor. Okay, that's a little bit more advanced of a thing. So just like a gunsmith that takes your barrel and puts it on a lathe and turns it and performs a machining operation, there are some things that are more of a mechanic level thing, a gun mechanic level thing, and then there are other things that's more of a user level task that is really easy. Okay, if I look and I see that my extractor is physically broken on my gun, that's a simple thing to fix. Whether it's a Glock, whether it's a 1911 pistol, whether it's an AR, whether it's a SCAR, that is a individual level task that anybody can do is replace an extractor. The most important thing on ARs and any type of rotating bolt, rifle, or any type of bolt mechanism that has a cam pin. Cam pins are super, 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 super important to have extras of, because if this cam pin fails, you could have catastrophic failure of the firearm. It's very, very dangerous for a gun to fail on the cam pin area. Don't cheap out on cam pins. This is a really important part. And when people consider, let's say along the lines of, my $350 AR, don't get me wrong, it's important that things are made affordable so that people can get into it at an affordable and entry level, but it's also important to understand where the quality lies and why something is expensive and why it's not, right? And the parts that are put into these guns make a huge difference, right? Just because something looks like that type of gun doesn't mean it's going to live up to every appreciable standard that gun is known for longevity and for safety in the long term, right? The difference between a Daniel Defense Mark 18 and a 12.5-inch AR that you built from Chinese parts.
I think
two different things.
You could say, all right, I've got an actual comparison here for that sort of topic. You take like a Smith & Wesson M&P, okay? We've done a meltdown on the gun before, and the thing performed wonderfully, okay? They're really, really high quality guns. Is it on the wall? Is it that one? I think that might be it. But very, very high quality guns, okay? And they're under like the $600 price point, okay? But they failed just like any other AR would under a lot of stress. I mean, the gas tube melted, the barrel started to droop a little bit. I mean, we put this thing through hell, all right? Now, you take a rifle like a Knight's SR-15. Now, why is that rifle, $2,000 compared to $600? Well, Knight's is a specialized manufacturer. They have a lot of proprietary parts that they put on their guns. I mean, for example, like the gas block, okay? A normal rifle that has a rail on it that you buy that's $600 or $700, okay? It has just a pin-on or a set screw gas block that slips over the barrel. Well, Knight's actually threads their barrels, and they have a gas block that threads into place and a small castle nut that holds everything on, okay? It keeps the gas block retained. So that's one specialized proprietary part. Their bolt carrier group, their receiver extensions, their barrel extensions, everything is all proprietary on those rifles. They have ambidextrous lowers. When you get into all those extra features, the cost goes up, especially with kind of a higher end manufacturer that does a lot of their own work in-house. Even like the Daniel Defense rifles, they do a lot of their work in-house. Their rifles are usually above the $1,000 mark.
Sure.
But you do get that kind of air of higher quality and that more fine-tuned quality control where you're not getting parts coming in from all these different OEM manufacturers and then you're just assembling guns. They're actually controlling everything in-house, which in the long run makes for a higher quality product and higher quality parts.
It does.
But when it comes down to the small parts, though, like just for example, I mean, an extractor, all right, $10 for an extractor, with spring, a little O-ring just to help with the retention, a pin, and then the extractor itself. Cam pins, $4 or $5. But when you get into comparing those same parts on like a SCAR 17, I mean, what are you looking at for like an extractor?
So let's talk a little bit about that. So it's one thing for parts to have a certain cost threshold that you're dealing with. It's another thing for parts to have an availability threshold, right? Let's say that I owned a Mercedes-Benz or something and I needed something repaired on my car. It would be the equivalent of me taking my gun my car to the mechanic and saying, hey, this is broke. And then the mechanic saying, well, I'm not going to be able to get the part for 3 or 4 weeks because Mercedes doesn't have parts available.
They're not making them right now.
That's the wrong answer, right? Yeah. Like, you'd be mad if you had to wait forever. And I'm not calling out specific manufacturers, but some manufacturers, it seems like they're really stingy with parts. And FN, in some cases, is definitely one of them. Like, I've been looking for the last 8 months for spare firing pins and extractors for the SCAR series. Brandy has a SCAR 16. I have a 17 and a 20, so we have 3 SCARs between the two of us, my wife and I. And I like to have extra parts on hand, right? So here recently, I was able to procure some parts. Not all the parts that I wanted, but there are certain parts on the SCAR that are a little bit more prone to breakage than other parts. And now remember, we talked about cam pins being important. Yeah, I found 4 extra cam pins. Now that's certainly fine. Okay, so we got extra cam pins. Bolt stops are important to have extras of. They break from time to time, okay? I did get some extra bolt stops. They were available and inexpensive.
Now, one thing, too, just looking at this bolt stop, this is a more complex part than a standard AR-15 or an AR-10
But the price really wasn't that much higher than a standard AR-15 counterpart. Now, I will say the cam pin is about triple the cost.
Yeah.
Now, across the board, the parts for the SCAR are going to cost about 3 times as much as an AR. Like an extractor, like he said, this is a CMMG Mark IV LE extractor. And this extractor is like $8, something like that, $10 maybe on the top end. A SCAR counterpart would be $35 for this extractor. So cam pins, extractors are important. Charging handles on SCARs are something that have been known to break here and there. And it's hard to find the charging handle assembly as one assembly. I had to order it in 2 parts, and this thing has to be like pushed on here and swaged on or whatever. But the thing is that the charging handles have been known on the SCAR to break, and I was able to procure 1 charging handle. From what I've been told, recoil springs are important too. Okay, so I was able to procure a couple of extra recoil springs. Now, these weren't too terribly expensive. I wouldn't say cheap by any stretch of the imagination, but for it to be 1 assembly, pre-assembled and ready to drop in, it wasn't terribly priced, and they were somewhat available. But I wasn't able to find firing pins or extractors.
Now, what about bolts?
Now, look, spare bolts can be had for the SCAR. They're very, very, very expensive. If you're talking just a carrier, and even just the carrier and bolt assembly is like a $450 assembly just for a spare carrier. From what I understand on the SCARs, what goes out the most is occasionally extractors, firing pins, cam pins, recoil springs wearing out, and charging handles breaking. If you shoot your SCAR and you break a charging handle, you need to replace your recoil spring. Okay, so don't just replace your charging handle. Fix your charging handle, but you need to replace your recoil spring, because what's happening is that carrier, because the SCAR uses such a heavy piece of reciprocating mass, if that rearward momentum is not being slowed down to the proper amount by the recoil spring, you're actually putting some adverse wear and tear not only on your carrier and all the components and your receiver, but that action, right? You know, scars beat up optics, and it's not the rearward motion of the bolt that is damaging the optic. If you've got a crummy optic on a scar, it's when the bolt falls and stops, and that inertia from that heavy mass stopping is what slams the optics. But the rearward and forward motion is what destroys the charging handle, and they'll break on the upstroke and coming back depending on what part is wore out. So that's something to consider, right? I mean, the scar is a huge reciprocating piece of mass on the carrier. I love my scars, but certain parts, just like any other gun, are consumable and will break over time. And, you know, it's really crazy how hard it is to get parts for some guns. It would just seem, and the firing pin on the scar is very complex. It's not a standard type of firing pin. It's a really odd and weird firing pin with a lot of intricate little weird, you know, turns on it and cuts. And if it breaks, you're screwed. So that's the thing. You know, it shouldn't be a big deal to be able to just procure a few extra firing pins and extractors for a given firearm. Okay, so that's FN. And I'm not going to get into other products that FN makes, but primarily the scars are the ones that, you know, I trust my life to that gun. So in order for me to trust my life to that firearm, I've got to be able to support it and make sure that I can keep it running if it has an issue, right? I don't want to get too far off on this vein, but I know that you have experienced this before as well. But a lot of manufacturers sell an armorer's kit for their firearm. Okay, so like Glock has a master armorer's kit. M&P, or the Smith & Wesson M&P, they have a master armorer's kit for their pistols. And a lot of times it's really difficult for a civilian to buy those kits. Because the company will say, well, why do you need this kit? Why do you need a kit that has 10 extra recoil springs, 5 extractors, and 5 of every part?
Because I have 10 of your guns. I mean...
Exactly.
You know?
Some people just have a lot of a certain gun, right? Somebody might have a lot of M&Ps, a lot of Glocks, and they need a lot of parts. And it's really convenient for a civilian, for average Joe, to be able to call up and go, yeah, I want this and this. And that process can be really hard. A lot of times to get parts, you have to go through chains, a supply chain, and you may have to go through a retailer and buy a part.
Yeah, piecemeal.
And, and if you want, like for instance, this kit right here, okay? This is just a little parts kit that Chad and I put together with a lot of essential AR parts that are nice to have spares of. Okay, CMMG makes both a continuous gas ring, which is a nice duty level gas ring for your AR, and then they also make the individual types. So if I have one wear out, I can replace a single, or if I just want that bomb-proof reliability, I can go with a continuous gas ring. But the nice thing about these parts is that they're available and they're not terribly expensive.
I think too
you can order in quantity.
If you think
and
about
they're in stock.
If you think about it, one of the main reasons why there probably is more availability of parts for, like, say, the AR-15 series of rifles compared to something like the SCAR series is just, you know, how much they're in use. I mean, the AR-15 is probably 10 to 20 times more in use out there today than the SCAR is. So, obviously, there's a lot more demand for AR parts. There's more manufacturers out there that are producing those parts. I mean, where are you going to get SCAR parts from? From FN. You know, so there's only one manufacturer producing those parts. So, therefore, the availability will be scant and the prices will be higher because they basically have a monopoly on those parts.
Well, however, though, the way that I look at it also is if you're going to make a top tier rifle that sells for a top tier money, you should those parts should be available.
They should.
You shouldn't have to. You shouldn't have to wait. You should be able to get what you need, and it shouldn't. Like I've been looking for 6 months for SCAR firing pins.
I've heard about it. I've heard about it all the time.
And it gripes you a little bit because it's like something as simple as a firing pin. All right, what if my firing pin was broken? All right, and I needed a firing pin to make my SCAR run and couldn't get one.
Yep.
And that leads us almost to another vein of this gripe. So getting off of like the armorer's kits, right?
Oh,
like
yeah.
I've called Glock, I've called Smith & Wesson and say, hey, yeah, I want to order an armorer's kit. Here's the part number. Like, you go in the catalog and they have an armorer's kit, like what they call unit level armoring kits. That they have for like police armorers or military armorers who need a lot of spare parts on hand to service department guns or unit guns for unit or whatever. And I've called and been like, yeah, I want to order this. Oh, we only sell that to law enforcement or military.
See,
Why?
The issue with
what does it matter?
the issue with it is those parts are real convenient for gun owners that have multiples of the same type of handgun or rifle or whatever the case is. But when you buy that kit, it's a lot cheaper buying that entire kit than buying every little individual piece. I mean, and especially, all right, this is a problem that I've had too. If I want to get like 10 of, say, one part, like I'll go into a shop sometimes and like, yeah, I need to get, like, where's your AR parts? It's like, well, I'm going to buy, 10 or 20 of these. Like, oh, well, I can't sell you that many.
Yeah.
They don't want to come off all their parts. I'm like, well, they're available. You got a bin full. I'm like, oh, I can't sell you that many. I can sell you 5. I'm like, dude, come on, man.
It's so strange to me why the parts availability tends to be such a weird thing. All right, so Walther. All right, love Walther now. Not taking a dump on Walther. I'm not taking a dump on any of these companies because they all make great products. I'm not saying that I have a problem with them. But like I had a Walther PPQ that we broke the slide stop on. And I contacted Walther and I'm like, hey, I want to buy a slide stop because I broke my slide stop. Oh, we'll send the gun in. We'll replace the slide stop. No. Send me the slide stop. Like, let me buy it and send it to me and I'll put it in. Like, there's this weird thing where like a lot of gun companies don't want to send you the part. They want you to send the gun in and fix it. Well, I was looking at the extractors on the SCAR, right? I hadn't had my SCAR apart in a while. Not to get back on the SCAR, but I'll mention the SCAR quickly again. I was doing a full cleaning on both of my SCARs the other day. And I noticed that the pin that holds the extractor in has this like Rube Goldberg setup to it. And I looked online and FN actually lists a removal of the extractor as an armor level task. What?
We'll see about that.
If you... No. I'm not talking about this from the era of competence.
Oh, I know.
I'm talking about this from an era of logistics, right?
Yep.
If you told Joe Blow that you couldn't remove the extractor on an AR to clean it, they wouldn't know what to do. Like that, you couldn't tell Joe and military Joe Blow, whoever soldier, that you can't remove the extractor off of AR. They'd be like, what? Like that's user level maintenance. That's just a basic thing to clean.
You have to park it in a foxhole and get out your armorer's kit and your vise.
So the SCAR has this little Rube Goldberg C-clip that holds the extractor pin in. And it's this weird, specialized, like headed little pin that it's a specialized part. And getting it out ain't that hard. Getting it back in.
You need 5 hands.
From what I read, at an armor level, when they do remove that pin, they rebuild the extractor, replace the extractor, and then they put a fresh C-clip in place when they put the pin back in. They're designed to be replaced, not put back in place. It's not just like
not
a simple...
reused.
No, they are not intended... That's not really the intended thing. But in the vein of that, okay, it should be easy to get the parts. Or, maybe FN should just... I would almost rather them like just up the price of the gun a little bit and just include a parts kit. Like, I wish more companies would do that.
That would be a good idea.
I mean, just up the price on the gun a little bit and just sell each gun with a few extra parts.
So let's think, we can compare like FN again, like with their pistols. Okay, so Eric and I both have FNX 45s. And, one of the things with the FNX 45 is the decocker and safety mechanism. If it ever fails, it's not really a user replaceable part. I mean, you basically have to break that part to get it out, and it's an armorer's level task, okay? When you think about like a Glock, there are a plethora of parts available out there for a Glock. And how many parts does a Glock have? Like less than 40 total? There are some guns that have over 100 little Rube Goldberg parts. Okay,
right. So
when you think about a really simple gun like a Glock, strikers, springs, the slide stops, pins, trigger connectors, trigger bars, like all those parts are very easy to source. They're very easy to replace, and there are a pile of manufacturers out there that make aftermarket parts, aftermarket triggers, connectors, the whole 9 yards. I mean, Glocks are one of the easiest guns to actually do your own maintenance and everything on. They make it purposely that way, where it is serviceable on a user level, and it is pretty much grunt-proof, more or less.
Look, there's a reason that Glocks are popular, okay? A Glock is actually not my favorite gun. I mean, I like Glocks.
But it's very utilitarian.
But it's a utilitarian gun. I think a lot of people might own Glocks in quantity because they know it's a gun they can depend on, they can trust. They're super easy to work on. They're super easy to replace parts for them. In terms of parts on the Glock, I would say it's a wise decision to probably keep a few extra slide stops. I have seen these break, okay? And they're so cheap. They're like $8, nothing to them. No big deal to have a few extras. I have seen trigger bars break. Now, it's usually a range gun that's had thousands and thousands of rounds through it, but I have seen the trigger bars fail.
Well, if you shoot them enough, the triggers will melt too.
We don't know anybody that would do that. But I have seen the trigger bars, break on them, and we've seen guide rods melt.
Yep.
Now, obviously, that's an extreme round count and getting the gun really hot, but the plastic guide rods on a Glock with enough extreme use can melt. That's a nice upgrade for a Glock, is a metal guide rod that doesn't really affect the overall function of the gun too bad. I have seen strikers break. It's not a bad idea to maintain an extra striker. Maybe a basic spring kit for a Glock is a nice thing to have laying around.
Really, springs, extractors, strikers. That's really about all you need besides a slide stop and maybe a pin set here and there. That's
I've seen
about
the
it.
ejectors break.
Yep.
Okay. You can keep extra ejectors. I find that it's honestly just easy enough to keep this whole block in, because chances are if an ejector starts to move or walk or loosen and it causes some geometry issue that causes it to break, then chances are you probably just want to go ahead and replace this whole block. And this part's cheap enough. It just comes with the ejector already installed. That's a good thing to have laying around, extra action blocks, whatever.
I would certainly say the comparison to a Honda Civic of guns is in order, because this is what we always say. The Glock is kind of like the Honda Civic of guns.
Yes.
The parts are plentiful, the parts are easily replaceable, the guns just go and go and go and go and go as long as you maintain them properly. Just like cars, okay, you have preventative maintenance that needs to be performed on your vehicle, right, to keep it on the road. The same concept goes with guns as well. There is preventative maintenance, cleaning your guns, inspecting the parts, replacing springs as they're needed. It just depends on round count. A lot of people don't really keep up with their round count, but I started keeping up with round counts on certain guns. So if I have a problem, I know kind of like where my numbers are as far as rounds down that barrel, and I can kind of determine, okay, well, I'm probably at the point where I'm going to wear out extractor. I'm probably at the point where I'm going to wear out my barrel. Okay, I'm at the point where I need to replace this spring or that spring or whatever the case might be. But just thinking about like a Glock compared to other stuff, and don't even get into like old or antique guns and things like that. If you start trying to source parts for antique firearms or old milsurps,
good luck.
Yeah, good luck indeed. But anyways,
the point of this video, I believe, is that, look, if you're a new gun owner and you're tuning into this because you're curious about what kind of part support there is for the gun that you might have just purchased, or if you're a guy that's been owning guns for 30 years and this is all old hat to you, I think the important takeaway is here, don't think that your gun is going to fail or something like that overnight. If you just bought a brand new Glock, trust me, it's going to take a lot of rounds before something fails, okay? So don't think that it's like some fluke thing that's going to, break, right? It's just, if you're looking at the longevity of being a gun owner and you think, okay, I want to really think about keeping my favorite firearm functioning and working for the long term, then parts support is something you are ultimately going to have to factor into your decision on what you're going to purchase, okay? Some brands are known for having really good parts support, and some brands may not necessarily be known for being super easy to get parts from. Like FN makes wonderful firearms. They're among my favorite guns. I own one of almost every FN product there is, okay? And I like them. But if something breaks, it's gonna be a chore to get extra parts, right? And the parts are gonna be expensive, but they do make extremely high quality firearms, okay? Whether it's a P90, FS2000, whether it's any of the 509s or the FNX. I will say, out of all their pistols, the FNX probably has the most gremlins, just from design flaws, but the FNX is an outstanding pistol. Now, let's look at like SIG or Glock or someone like that. You're going to be able to source all the parts for a Glock that you could possibly ever dream of, no problem. AR-15s, obviously, parts are freaking everywhere. Now, look, I mentioned like Mossberg 590, Remington 870. There are parts out there for those guns, like OEM level parts. Don't expect to find them in any kind of quantity extremely easy. There are certain companies that tend to prefer the whole, hey, ship the gun back and we'll fix it type of arrangement versus, hey, my safety on my Mossberg gave out. I want to buy a new safety. They're going to probably refer you to a third-party company that sells parts. They're not going to want to deal with that directly, okay? It's just not it's not easy for them from a logistical level to sell you a part over the phone directly from the company. Yeah. Now, if it's a warranty thing, and let's just say you don't know how to do something and your gun's broken, it needs to be fixed, well, then obviously you can contact the company no matter who makes the gun, and chances are they're going to do whatever it takes to make sure you're happy. You just might have to ship the gun back to them so that they can perform the necessary warranty work, and of course you're going to be without your gun during said time, which and that time can be anywhere from, a few weeks to a few months, depending on the company.
Yep. I mean, Eric mentioned shotguns like the 590s and the 870s and such. Pump action shotguns are relatively simple in function, but when you start taking them apart, you have the trigger guard itself actually contains a lot of components that aren't very easy to work on just from a user standpoint. You really have to have a knowledge of how that thing goes together. If you ever had to replace some particular component or spring, like a hammer spring or something along those lines, it's a little bit crazy to get into those components sometimes. It's not as simple as something like a Glock is, just pushing a couple of pins and pulling the entire assembly out. It's a lot of small components that have to be lined up properly and put back together just right for it to function properly.
That's a good point, man.
Those parts are relatively inexpensive, though, and a lot of times if something breaks, like a hammer, you can source just the entire trigger group itself for reasonable money and just replace the entire thing and just start from scratch. But in my case, I've got a lot of Beretta and Benelli shotguns, and when you start sourcing extra parts for those, it seems like the imported firearms a lot of times are a little bit more expensive because the only place you're going to get those parts, just like FN, you're only going to get it from Beretta, or you're only going to get it through Benelli. And there's a lot of companies that sell these parts like Numeric, Gun Parts Corp, a few others that gunsmiths go to a lot to buy components to repair customers' guns. And when you look at like a firing pin for a Beretta, it might be $30, but the firing pin for a 870 might be $8.
Yeah, or a striker, a complete striker for a Glock might only be $8, and it comes with the spring.
But we could definitely, we could definitely go down numerous rabbit holes.
Oh, look, so to quickly, I agree 100% with what Chad is saying on that regard. I will brag on CZ for a second, though.
Oh yeah.
Now I will say this. CZ keeps parts.
They do.
That's one thing I can say. Like, if you break a part on a CZ, chances are you're going to be able to replace that part without very much difficulty at all. And for someone that imports guns, CZs, I have to say, like, they do a really great job of keeping up with parts support for the platforms that they make. Even stuff that's discontinued, they'll usually have some supply of parts on hand. So I have to say they're pretty good about that.
Well, hey, man,
not every company is super good about keeping up with parts support.
CZs don't break though, right?
They don't. Now, so all right, look, the
CZ
only
fanboys.
No. Look, the only thing that I've ever really seen break on a CZ, I've seen. So I have an SP01 Phantom, and I actually had a magazine release mess up on me.
Yep.
I don't know what caused it. I don't know if maybe it was just from inserting a full magazine on a closed slide, and it was just putting a lot of stress when I went to slap it in place. Not sure what that could have been.
I remember when that happened.
But I was able to get the replacement part. No big deal. Super, super easy. But don't think that any one company is better or worse in terms of parts occasionally wearing out. There are parts of every single firearm that are considered consumable parts that will eventually wear out or break. And I would say that generally, across any gun design, I would always try to keep at least the most crucial springs, at least one set of extra springs, and I would say an extra firing pin, extractor, and you're probably okay. If you've got an AR or some type of rifle with a rotating bolt, some sort of camming bolt, a few extra cam pins probably couldn't hurt to have, and you're probably going to be okay. We could go on a lot of different veins in this video, but I think we kind of got the point across, I hope. Some companies are a lot better than others in terms of parts support, but as Chad said, some of those guns are in much more common use. So as you stay towards the most common use article in terms of gun designs out there, you're going to see that the parts support is a lot more prevalent and easy to source. So that's just something that you need to do your homework on, especially if you're a new gun owner and you're thinking about the longevity of being a gun owner. You need to understand that certain guns are easier to fix than others, and I guess that's the main point that we're trying to drive home in today's video.
Think so?
Absolutely. You got anything else for him?
Nah, man. We're good.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I mean,
let these people get back to their day.
Oh yeah. I mean, you could even go into suppressors. That's a whole nother. Yeah. Maybe we'll make another video
about that right now.
We'll make another video on that because you can't order parts for suppressor. It has to be serviced by the manufacturer. Anyway, we'll get on that in a future video. But guys, always look at the total cost of being a gun owner and look at the cost of maintenance and the cost of ownership of the guns that you're getting into before you dive too heavily, and you'll find that you'll come out a lot better in the long run knowing a little bit more about that relationship before you get into it. So thank you guys for watching. We really appreciate the support. Have a great day, and we'll see you next time.
See you guys.